Hello my loves, it's Jananie and welcome back to my channel, This Story Ain't Over. Today I'm going to be recommending you a bunch of books based off of your ass on Instagram. I put up a story on Instagram asking you guys for genres, themes, vibes that you were looking for in books so that I could recommend you some books here. I've done this video a couple times before, so I'll leave those linked down below. Now before we get into the book recs, I want to remind you that if you enjoy my content and you want to see more of it, please hit that like and subscribe button down below. And if you want to get some extra exclusive content from me, then definitely go check out my bindery community down below. I post monthly TBRs, weekly journal entries, updates on the vlogs that I'm working on, and other just fun and exciting content, along with monthly Zoom hangouts with my bindery members. So if any of that sounds interesting, definitely go check out my bindery community and join it for the price of a latte and support me and my channel along the way. Alright, so the first request that I got was a wholesome, heartfelt, heartwarming story about found family, and I paired this with another request that said warm and cozy, low stakes books. So I've got two books that sort of fulfill both of those, and they are The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana and then Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldry. Both these books involve a found family aspect, and they are definitely fantasies with low stakes. Both of them are super warm and cozy and definitely the perfect books to curl up with during this time of year. Alright, request number two is something to do with the hardships of parenthood. Now I am not a parent, so I cannot attest to the actual hardships of being a parent, but these two books feel like they get into that realm. So the first one is a cozy mystery, and that is Finley Donovan is Killing It by Elle Casamano. This is such a fun mystery, cozy novel. It involves a 30-something-year-old mother with multiple children dealing with being a mother and being a writer and just trying to have everything together. And she finds herself in a sticky situation when someone overhears her talking with her agent about her murder mystery novel, and that person thinks that Finley is a contract killer. The other book that I have to recommend is The School for Good Mothers by Jessamine Chan. I read this last year, and it is a bit of a chilling book about the hardships of parenthood, especially to do with motherhood. It really talks about the unfair expectations that are placed on mothers, and it does it in this sort of dystopian slash sci-fi way. It's set in our real world in like the present day, but essentially these women who have been bad mothers are sent off to this place or school where they have to learn to become good mothers, and there's like this rigorous training and some really bad shit going on. Alright, request number three, someone asked for complicated mother-daughter relationships, preferably Indian or South Asian. So I've got a couple South Asian ones, and then I've got one by a Palestinian author. So if you're looking for a YA, I have The Love and Lies of Ruxana Ali. This deals with a complicated mother-daughter relationship, but in relation to the main character's sexuality. She is lesbian, and there is an element of her struggling against the conservative nature of her parents' thinking and the culture. And this book has a lot of triggers in it, I would say, and deals with a set of parents that really don't want to accept the main character's sexuality, but she does start to see some unlikely support from people in her family that she really didn't expect. I feel like the mother-daughter relationship in this one was very fraught and, you know, kind of heartbreaking, so it'll definitely deliver on complicated. Similarly, I have Marriage of a Thousand Lies by S.J. Sindhu. This is again a book that deals with a complicated mother-daughter relationship in relation to the main character's sexuality, so she's also lesbian, and her mother and family don't really want to accept this. And the main character in this book, like the main character in Ruxana Ali, is sort of trying to walk the thin line and balance between abandoning the family that you love, but also trying to live your truth, and how it's not so easy to pick one or the other. Funnily enough, my third book rec for this is by a Palestinian American author, and it also involves a mother-daughter relationship that's complicated by the fact that the main character is not straight. So that is You Exist Too Much by Zaina Arafat. This has to deal with like the main character's sexuality. She's bi, I believe, but it also has to deal with like her mental state and how she feels like she can never live up to her mother's expectations. And I feel like that's a large part of this book. The title of this book comes from a line in the book where the mother says that the main character exists too much. Like she says, you exist too much, like you are too much. And the book overall is such a ride. The main character is really unhinged, but I feel like the complicated mother-daughter relationship was actually a really interesting one. Alright, request number four, I have two requests that sort of are similar. So the first one was contemporary literary that doesn't feel pretentious. I need a read that flows but hits hard. This was a request from one of my favorite authors, Vaishnavi Patel. And then another request said litfic but not boring. Okay, so I have four different book recs for this one. So the first one is An American Marriage by Tyree Jones. This is a fantastic book that takes the topic of race in America America and tackles it through the lens of this marriage. So it essentially follows our two black main characters, and they are married, and they're launched into an unfortunate set of circumstances when the husband is arrested for a crime that he did not commit. And so from there, the book takes us through the years while he's in jail, and as the wife is trying to support him, but also struggling with, you know, the deterioration of their marriage. And then the book also follows the characters after he is out of jail and the aftermath of that. There's also an element of another character and a bit of a love triangle, but I think this book just explores the idea of race in such an incredible way and in such a personal and like heartbreaking way. This is a love story that is ultimately affected by the cruel evils of America and the state of race in America. Now, if you're looking for a funny, non-pretentious lit fic, then I would definitely go with Big Swiss by Jen Began. This is a really laugh out loud, funny story about a woman sort of going through a midlife crisis. She is a transcriber for this sex therapist, and she essentially ends up falling in love with one of the patients of the sex therapist. And from there we delve into this clandestine affair and a sort of remaking of the main character's mental space. This is a hilarious literary fiction with really great mental illness representation, and one that I absolutely loved. And then I would also recommend Evil Eye by A. Tough Brum. This is another literary fiction. It's by a Palestinian American author and follows a Palestinian American main character. And this basically follows a deterioration of a marriage and a main character who is essentially realizing that she's unhappy with her life, but she's also dealing with a lot of generational trauma and trying to deal with the guilt of the fact that she has it so much better than the women who came before her, but she is still unhappy. This book has some really great mental illness representation as well, specifically depression. And it's a depression that is just so all-consuming that you sort of lose yourself in everything and in your life, and you start to allow other people to dictate your life in a way that you never imagined. This is absolutely heartbreaking and a beautiful literary fiction, and I highly recommend it. And then on a similar note to all of these, I have Against the Loveless World by Susan Abdul Hawa, which was the January book club pick for my book club, Boundless Book Club. If you haven't heard about it or checked it out, the link is down below. We discuss books on a monthly basis on the app called Fable. But this book basically follows a Palestinian main character whose life takes her on this crazy trajectory through many countries in the Middle East and through some really difficult things in her life. She is slowly radicalized throughout the book, and it's such a gripping, funny, and heartbreaking book that will leave you like shattered with tears, but also just so angry and also just so appalled with the world. Alright, request number 5 was a love story with a sad ending that doesn't involve death. Alright, I have 3 books for this. All these have sort of a sad / bittersweet ending. They do involve love stories, but I also think that in some of these, the love story isn't necessarily the main focus. It is a large part of the story, but there's so many other elements to these books. So the first one I have is The Stationery Shop by Marjan Kamali. I recommend this all the time, but this is sort of a star-crossed lover situation. The main characters meet in 1950s Tehran, Iran, and they are ripped apart because of the political upheaval there, and then we are meeting them many years later as they're trying to figure out what happened in between since the years that they were separated and when they're meeting again. And then I have When We Left Cuba by Chanel Cleaton. I've recommended this also a bunch of times, and this involves a Cuban main character who's living in Florida in the 1960s, and she finds herself in a forbidden love affair with this powerful man in the States. This is a book about revenge and about politics and about Cuba and about the main character's ardent love for Cuba, but the romance also plays a large part even if the main character is really the focus. The end of this book was just like so heartbreaking, and I definitely felt all the feels. And then the last book rec that I have for this request is Cleopatra and Frankenstein by Coco Malloys. This book is not necessarily a love story, it's really just an examination of different messy characters, all with intersecting relationships, and all characters who are sort of lonely in New York. Although this initially starts out kind of seeming like a romance, it really isn't. But the ending is definitely a sadder, bittersweet one that really just leaves things open-ended and leaves you with a lot of questions and thoughts. Alright, request number 6 was a very atmospheric gothic book, preferably with witches. And then I paired this with a couple other requests, so dark and witchy vibe, and then adult urban fantasy. So all 3 of the books that I have to recommend are on the like dark gothic atmospheric vibe. First up I have Mexican Gothic, which is definitely very gothic, very dark, very atmospheric. It involves a bit of a haunted house situation, and it definitely delves into sort of that romantic gothic aspect. And then in terms of a witchy vibe, I have Venko by Sherry Demeline. This is definitely more of a light-hearted yet dark fantasy, urban fantasy with witches, and it involves this diverse set of witches who come together and who are trying to defeat this age-old misogynistic villain. And then the last one that I have is Starling House by Alexi Harrow. This is definitely more on that like adult urban fantasy vibe. It's definitely got those like dark atmospheric vibes to it, but it's also a little bit on, I would say, the lighthearted side. It's got some funny moments, a cute romance, and definitely will give you those urban fantasy vibes. Alright, request number 7 was a pretty popular one. There were several requests that were around this similar vein. So I have Unhinged Main Character, Truly Unhinged Female Main Character by BIPOC Preferred, and Unhinged Female Main Character but BIPOC. Okay, so I have a few for this one. I have Kim Ji-young, born 1982 by Cho Nam-ju. This is essentially like a novella of a Korean woman who is like married, has kids, whatever. She's living the like perfect life that she should be, like the traditional one that's expected of her. But essentially this book goes through her progressive mental breakdown as she is increasingly frustrated with the expectations that are placed on her in society. It deals with her frictions in all of her roles as a mother, a daughter, a sister, a model employee, and a wife. And then next I have You Exist Too Much by Zayn Arafat. I already mentioned this one, but truly this book has a very unhinged main character. She goes through a lot. She's also dealing with some mental health issues, and she's also just like making some terrible decisions along the way. But although she's doing all of these things, I feel like she's such an endearing character and one that you just can't help but feel for. And then I have Women Eating, which follows a British, Japanese, Malaysian vampire. She's like mixed race, and this is just following her in like the current day as she's dealing with being a vampire and sort of leaving her mother behind. It's a relatively short book, but the main character is definitely unhinged. And then lastly, I have one of my favorite unhinged main character books, and that is Disorientation by Elaine Seychaux. This book is very similar to Yellowface, if you've ever read that, by R.F. Kuang. It deals with the topic of Yellowface, Orientalism, race, also academia. But what I love most about this book is the unhinged main character who is starting to realize that she's kind of unhappy with the life that she has right now, and that seems on the outside perfect. And she's also a main character who has sort of lived in her own little bubble for most of her life, and she is slowly going through a decolonization of her mind. She's slowly being radicalized and starting to see all the things wrong with, you know, society and the things around her. This book definitely veers more into like the satirical side, and it's just so freaking funny. Okay, request number 8 was just generally for a mystery thriller. So if you've been following my channel for a while, you know that I don't really read a lot of mystery thrillers, but I do have a few that I really did enjoy. So I have The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelids. This involves 2 unreliable narrators, and one of our main characters is a criminal psychotherapist named Theo, and he is sort of visiting this new facility to sort of learn more about this woman who supposedly killed her husband and then ceased to speak afterwards. He's hoping to work with her and help her through this like block on her ability to speak. And while we're getting chapters from Theo's perspective, we're also getting chapters from Alicia's perspective, the woman who killed her husband. And although things seem to be one way at the beginning, they definitely are something else by the end. And then I have In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. This is one of my favorite thrillers I've ever read. It really impressed me, and it's basically like a college reunion situation where essentially when these people were in college, one person in their group was murdered, and so they're at this reunion trying to figure out who actually did it, and they're, you know, sort of spilling secrets from way long ago. To me, it felt a little bit like Gossip Girl-esque in the sense that there were so many secrets running around and so many ulterior motives, and even beyond the mystery of the murder, there's still like other mysteries going on. And then finally, if you're looking for a mystery thriller, I would highly recommend Tiffany D. Jackson. She has multiple mystery thriller horror novels, but these are 2 of her best mysteries, I think. So I have Allegedly and then Monday Is Not Coming. I think so far she's only done YA books, but these were just so incredible. They deal with race, with mental health, they have some unreliable narrators, and overall these were just such stunning mystery thrillers. Alright, request number 9 was a very specific one, and it was sapphic historical romance set in the 18th century. Alrighty, for this one I have 2 book recommendations. So first I have The Lady's Guide to Celestial Mechanics by Olivia Waite. I've never actually read this before, but I'm hoping to pick it up soon. It is essentially a sapphic romance set in the 19th century, so it's set in 1816, so not quite 18th century, but still. And from what I've heard, it's a bit of a heartbreaking, beautiful romance. So I'm very excited to pick this one up because I've just been craving historical romances a lot, and I'm really excited to pick up a sapphic one. And then the second book rec that I have for this request is House of Hunger by Alexis Henderson. This isn't necessarily a historical romance, and it definitely has more of that horror vibe to it, but it is set in this like fantasy world that seems sort of 19th century-esque, and it involves a sapphic relationship at the center of the novel. All right, request number 10 was a reverse or queer grumpy sunshine romance with cozy magical vibes. So I have a book that is exactly this. It's the reverse grumpy sunshine with cozy magical vibes, and that is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. This is essentially like an alternate history fantasy. It's set in the 1900s, and it follows our curmudgeonly main character, Emily Wilde, who is a professor and the foremost expert on fairies. So in this version of our world, there are fairies, and she's investigating them, and she's trying to write this Encyclopedia of Fairies. And during her research, she is joined by one of her colleagues, Wendell Bambleby. And Wendell is just the most like sunshine character, I would say. Like, he's just so funny and happy, and he really is always trying to draw Emily out of her shell. And I think the balance of their two characters is just so cute and adorable. So yeah, if you're looking for those cozy magical vibes, if you're looking for that grumpy sunshine vibe, then this is definitely the book to pick up. All right, request number 11 was for something akin to The Crew of Gilded Wolves, but adult. So I really had to think hard for this one because the Gilded Wolves series by Roshni Chokshi is fantastic. I love those characters, and I think one thing that really marks that set of characters apart from some other like large cast fantasies is that they are all like from very different backgrounds and they have different strengths to them. So one book that has a similar structure to that, and that is an adult book, is The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. Although The Gilded Wolves is set in sort of a historical period and it's like sort of urban fantasy in a historical sense, this is sort of a urban fantasy sci-fi in our present day, and essentially it involves a large cast of characters, each of whom is sort of an avatar of one of the boroughs in New York City, and essentially they all sort of come together to fight off this age-old evil. One thing that is different about the characters in this book versus The Gilded Wolves is that although The Gilded Wolves has characters who are all the same age, the characters in this book are all of varying ages, and so that adds another element, I think, to the diversity, which I really appreciated. Okay, request number 12 was Ex-Lovers Give Themselves a Second Chance, and the two books that I immediately wanted to recommend based off of that also fulfilled another request, which was for Black romance. So those two books are Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan and then 7 Days in June by Tia Williams. Both of these books feature Black main characters falling in love, and we are seeing them fall in love for the second time. This book involves a couple that has been divorced, they're still co-parenting their kids, and they're sort of finally reaching this level of healing that is bringing them back together and giving the possibility of rekindling their love. And then 7 Days in June follows a set of characters who fell in love when they were much younger but were ripped apart for reasons larger than themselves, and they are coming back together many years later when they are both writers, and they've both been sort of writing to each other through their books over the past several years. Both of these feature lovely main characters, each incredible in their own right, even aside from their romances, and I just loved seeing them fall in love again. All right, next someone asked for a book that addresses colonialism, and I have a very obvious recommendation, and that is Babel by R.F. Kuang. I feel like R.F. Kuang's books all feature an element of addressing colonialism, but this one is very much the one that addresses it. It's a dark academia, it involves themes of colonialism, it follows a set of main characters who are students at the Fictional Translation Institute at Oxford called Babel, and the book essentially deals with the topic of how translation can be an act of betrayal and an act of power when it comes to colonialism. This is set in the 19th century, and it deals with revolution, with violence, and really talks about how people rising up against colonialism have only so many means to do so. Okay, next someone asked simply for a fake dating book. So I have a few for that. I have Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert. This involves a fake dating relationship between a PhD student and the security guard at the school that she goes to, and he also moonlights as a rugby coach for these young boys. And then I've got The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. This is definitely more of a cringy fake dating, I would say, but this involves a fake dating relationship between a PhD student and a professor. And then the last one I have is Dating Dr. Dil by Nisha Sharma. This involves two Indian main characters who are fake dating so that they can fulfill their parents' need for them to get married, and so that they can get the rewards that their parents parents are sort of offering them. Next up, someone asked for creepy vibes, and I cannot go without recommending Natural Beauty by Ling Ling Huang. This is a horror novel that deals with a lot of creepiness, and it really talks about the idea of beauty and a strive for perfection. There's so many creepy scenes in this book that just definitely had my skin crawling, so highly recommend for that reason. Alright, next someone asked for a book to read when you want to feel smart. So I have 2 books by the same author, one fiction and one non-fiction. So those 2 books are by Yanis Varoufakis. He was the former finance minister for Greece. So first up I have Talking to My Daughter About the Economy, or How Capitalism Works and How It Fails. This is essentially a non-fiction book where Yanis Varoufakis goes through how capitalism works and how it fails. And he describes it all in a very simple language and very like straightforward manner that is really digestible and easy to understand. And he also connects the different themes of capitalism to different literature from the times of when certain parts of capitalism sort of came to be. I really loved a lot of the like mythology and literature references in this book, so it's definitely a treat for a book lover. And then the fiction novel that he's written, which is Another Now, is a sci-fi novel that sort of again talks about capitalism and posits a world where capitalism doesn't exist and how our society might run in that situation. Essentially, our main characters in this book get a view into that another now, that other world where capitalism doesn't exist, and they're trying to tease out the differences between our world and that one and how both succeed and fail in different ways. This book is definitely a lot more dense and has some long paragraphs about, you know, the different parts of capitalism and the economy. So definitely go into it with like a open mind and a desire to learn, but it's still a really great book. All right, and then the final request that I'm going to go through and the final book rec that I have is for a family saga, and I of course had to recommend Pachinko by Min-jin Lee. This is one of my favorite historical fiction, family saga, generational trauma books. Essentially, it follows several generations of this one family that begins with this young woman named Sanja in Korea, and it essentially takes us through the 20th century as Sanja's a young woman. She falls in love with this powerful man that she really shouldn't, gets pregnant, and then finds herself marrying a man to go to Japan during the colonial period in Korea, and then finds her descendants, you know, going off to America. And we have just so many different like characters throughout the process and different descendants in this family. And it's essentially this really moving saga of love, loyalty, ambition, and sacrifice. This is one of those beautifully told, really moving and heartbreaking novels that will just leave you sobbing by the end. This book also deals a lot with the topic of colonialism, and not only like British and American colonialism, but also Japanese colonialism, which is quite an interesting topic. So yeah, for whoever asked for a colonialism book rec, this one also works for that. And with that said, those are all of the book recs that I want to give you today. There were a lot of requests that came through on Instagram, and I obviously couldn't get to all of them, but hopefully you got some good book recs from these ones. Let me know down below if you guys have read any of these books and what you thought of them, and if you have any different recommendations for some of these requests, I would love to hear them down below. As always, if you haven't already, go check out my Instagram, TikTok, Goodreads, and Bindery community down below for some exclusive and extra content, and I will see you guys in my next video. So please remember that this story ain't over. Bye!